Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thanks all for joining this session. This webinar is about how do you get started with Volt Iris and Volt Foundry. So I'm going to be talking through some of the fundamentals as well as introducing you to some concepts on Iris and Foundry that you might not have heard in the earlier sessions. This is supposed to be an intro session, so we will be covering a lot of ground, but not going too deep into any of them. We have other reference materials coming at the end that will help you learn more about the product in detail. So as you're aware, I think as most of you are aware, this is part of the Volt MX Go webinar series. This is the fourth in the series. And this one, as I said, is about Volt Iris and Foundry. We have a few more coming in next and the week after that as well. Now, what is Volt MX Go? I think most of you have heard about this. This is basically about extending and modernizing your Domino applications in a way that is maximizing your investment and ensuring that the skills that you have built across the years on Formula language as well as the Lotus script language is reused and helps you build applications leveraging that, as well as be able to use the more modern technologies and be able to build for any platform and do the same thing in a way that saves considerable amount of labor and your investment. So that is the key. We have talked about this quite a bit. If you have more questions on the Volt MX Go, I would highly recommend watch the previous webinars in this series, because this webinar, as we said, is going to focus more on the Volt MX Iris Foundry introduction parts. With that, let's start with a platform overview of Volt MX. So what is Volt MX? Volt MX is primarily a low-code application development platform. And as we tried to show at the top, it is an MX or multi-experience platform that can build an app for any target device, whether it is a mobile, wearable, desktop, tablet, kiosk like your ATM machine, or you're building chatbots. It can build an app targeting any platform using a single code base. So that is the value proposition, so to speak, of MX, right? And it can connect to any data backend to get data for using in your application. The primary things within Volt MX are Iris and Foundry. We'll be going through that in a bit more detail. Iris is our IDE, Foundry is our backend. Leap, which is our citizen development IDE, is also part of Volt MX. So if you want to use Leap capabilities, that is also available. We also have a marketplace. I'll touch upon this briefly. This is a place where we have our sample applications, sample components, like if you want to build a carousel view, or if you want to have an augmented reality or a chat bot, or how do I connect with the, some third party like Alexa, you will have samples for those in the marketplace. And it also comes with the test automation. I'll also briefly talk about that, along with DevOps and ability to host where you want to, right? With that, I know that you're going to hear a lot of new words, and we wanted to take a moment to just, kind of draw a model between the vocabulary that you're used to in Domino, as well as the vocabulary that we are going to use in Volt MX, right? So some of the terminologies, right? I just want to bring this up. So Domino server is your backend, and the equivalent, again, these are not a like-to-like comparison. This is to give you a better idea of a mental model of what this kind of relates to, right? So the Foundry is the equivalent of a Domino server. Domino designer, the equivalent here is going to be Iris. And directory assistance, which is something I think we use in Domino to connect to other systems. The equivalent for that in a Foundry would be something called as an identity service. We look at this in a bit more detail. In Designer, you would want to use preview in from the menu to preview something, and Iris, the equivalent of previewing, would be the preview capability, which will let you preview the apps, right? And we have form in Domino. Again, there is a form in VoltMX. They are not exactly the same, but they are similar enough to make this analogy for a representation, a mental model, so to speak, right? And we also have a document pre and post processing via code in Domino, and the similar thing for VoltMX would be pre-post processes as well, and there are kind of an equivalent here in MX. So these are, again, right, there are a lot more notes and terms that are used in Domino as well as Foundry. I didn't want to burden you with all of them upfront, but I wanted to give you enough basics in terms of glossary so that you can understand or relate to a lot of these things better in this particular session. Right? And the Domino web agent equivalent would be the runtime application service as far as Foundry is concerned. Now, let's jump into, what is Iris, what is Foundry in a lot more detail. Iris, as we said, is the app development IDE. It is something you download to your local system, as we said, similar to your Domino designer, and Foundry is the backend, which is used for data integration. So Iris is a WYSIWYG IDE. WYSIWYG, as in what you see is what you get. You exactly see how it is going to be represented in each device without even building. And that is one of the key things about Iris. It is real-time preview, right? It is multimodal. It will let you see across different form factors like tablet or desktop, or even within desktop, you can have responsive web, PWA, responsive web with different breakpoints, right? As well as I said, kiosk and tablets and smartwatches. It also has a visual workflow editor. I'll show that shortly. Cross-platform APIs, Foundry integration, as well as native and ability to build for either native or web. Now, Iris, as I mentioned earlier, is the IDE, and one of the value prop I said was the ability to build code for any device from one code base. So underneath or baked into Iris is what we call as Flare, VoltMX Flare. This is basically our secret sauce. This ensures that the application developer written code, either in JavaScript or using the action editor, becomes a native running binary depending on the type of platform. That is, if you're building for web, it will be web. So it has that capability. If you're building for native, it will have that, and it will run as native. It will have 100% access to the native APIs, right? And if you're building for web, whether it is a progressive web app or responsive web with support for service workers and offline support, high performance, all these capabilities are baked in. And this is an omni-channel framework, which is ensuring that your application logic is running across all this. And we have written the platform code, so to speak, as to how a certain widget has to work on iOS versus Android versus web versus Windows, so to speak, right? And all that is complexity has been addressed as part of the platform, so that the app developer is writing in very simple JavaScript or using the action editor, as I said. So Flare is effectively the secret sauce under the hood that is building our native or web apps, right? With that, I'll move on to a demo. Okay, we'll start with the demo of Iris. So Iris, as you can see in my screen, so this is Iris. So to start with, there are a lot of things on this, right? So I just want to introduce you to the panels. So first off, here on the left is what is the project structure. It's basically your forms, the elements within forms, like your logos or text boxes, buttons. They are within containers, so there will be a flex container label. So effectively, this is your project structure, right? And it will have different things. Say, for example, for mobile, responsive web, in this particular project, I'm not enabled for tablets. If I enable for tablets, it will show for tablets as well. So I can basically, the mobile, tablet, responsive web variables, and I can also choose to filter what I'm seeing on the left panel. So if I'm in front-end designer and I'm not concerned with JavaScript controllers and stuff, I can hide them so that it is not cluttering my view. It also has the ability to surface your test resources. We'll come to test modulation later, test automation later, but it basically is your project filter, which is showing your project structure and stuff, right? So then this is the main place, which is called as canvas. So in the canvas is where you are building your exact look and feel of the app that you want to have, right? So basically this is currently it is showing Android native and Samsung Galaxy S8, and it is having some zoom form factor. So this is exactly how this is going to look in a particular Galaxy 8. So if I want to switch it, say from Android native to iOS native, and then I can actually go and just as easily flip through all the device models, popular ones in the market, and see how exactly it is going to look, for example, on an iPhone 12 Pro versus iPhone XS or any other device, even an iPhone SE if you want. It is going to show you how exactly it is going to look. So you do not have to guess how the form is going to look or whatever you're building is going to look at any point of time. You don't have to even build the app to see this. As I said, this is a complete WYSIWYG real-time preview, right? So this is the canvas. And if you're building it for portrait versus landscape, you can toggle the orientation, you can toggle the shell, you can say if you want to see the shell or do not want to see the shell of the device. So you can do all that. I can even do a split view if I want to see my code and this parallel to each other. So this is the project structure, this is the canvas, and on the right you have two things: your properties. Your properties can be multiple things based on the context of which widget I am in. So for example, if I am in a particular label, right, then or just focused on the button, so we'll just go with the button. So the button has an ID, it is whether visible or off, what is the text that is on it, right? And it can have alignment stuff. So basically I can do the alignment and orientation exactly how I want. I can do content alignment of different elements within a container as is. So if I want all of them to be left or right or center, I can do all that, or top or bottom or middle, I can do all of that. And I can also do my positioning exactly by data pixels or percentage, right? You have different mechanisms of setting the exact orientation, exact position of your widgets. You can of course drag and drop and do that too, but if you want more precise, this ability is always there. It includes padding, margin, something that you would have in a CSS, but a bit more advanced than what you would have regularly, right? So it gives you full flexibility to determine the exact look and feel, including the ability to change text and stuff. So this is one such tab. I'm not going to go into each of them, but at a high level, I just want to introduce some of the concepts, right? So it also has something called as a skin. Skin determines the look, visual aspects, like, hey, this is something which is having a green color, single color background. I can as well keep it like multicolored, gradient, image, and I can make this a skin so that all the buttons within my application have the exact same look and feel. I can do all that. As well as I can import stuff. I can create a constant if I want to. If I have a style guide for my a company and I have to always use the same RGB color values, then I can set that as a constant and ensure all the skins are following that same style guide. So you can basically even make this into a constant and use just like you're using a variable, right? So that is about look and feel, right? You also have actions associated. If it is a button, you would have the ability to do some action when somebody is clicking something, or you can also have multiple actions like on touch start, on touch move. This is going to change depending on the type of widget. A button has these actions, some other widget might have some other actions. I can click this action editor, so to speak, and see the code or logic that has been written, or in this case not written but created using the action editor. So action editor is basically like a flow chart of creating the client application logic. So we have a lot of building blocks like you're adding your variable, navigating to a form, setting a timeout, invoking a call, or invoking a function, your if else if conditional blocks, right? If you have a volt formula, you'll have your volt formula block, invoking service, loading indicators, because when you are trying to fetch data, you want to give a feedback to the user, end user, that hey, it is in progress. So you might want to start a loading indicator, end a loading indicator, set some widget properties, open some URL, send an email, right? So, or do some animation, add mapping. A lot of the functionality that you're going to have in a typical app can be done pretty much using this, so that your actual application has very minimal code, and in some cases no code as well, right? So this is just showing a specific example. So there is an if clause, they're starting an indicator, this is a login, right? So then they're doing a mapping the email and password to the specific service, then they're invoking the service, and you can see the service invocation where the different fields are mapped from your client app to the particular thing that this service is expecting, right? And then you can show an alert, you can choose what type of alert it is, whether it is an info alert, error alert, different types of alert, right? And you can have different validation sequence, loading indicators, or navigate to a different form. You can choose which form, and while navigating, so you can see that all the different paths that it can traverse based on the conditions can all be visually seen on this action editor. Now this is a diagram view, as we call it. Now the same thing you can, if you want, you can see in a design view, which will be in an if else code kind of structure, but more like still building blocks. If you want to actually see the code that is generated behind the scene, you can click on the code view, and the code view will show you this. Again, diagram view is what most people would use, but if you want to troubleshoot, or if you want to reuse that logic somewhere else and you just are keen on understanding how exactly it is being built, the code view can help you understand. And even then, if you want to see exactly how it works on an iPhone versus Android, all the different small changes in flavor that we have put in so that it works as it is expected in an iPhone versus an Android would be also present here. So this is a brief about Action Editor, right? Now, the other important tab here is around data and services. So we will go into this in a lot more detail while we are covering Foundry. But at a high level, anytime you're building an application, the application is connecting to some backend and getting data. So at a high level, okay, this is a login. So it is going to have a login operation. So you can see the login from here. You can see what are the input parameters, output parameters, and such. It looks like my iris has timed out, so it is trying to log me in again. Apologies for that. This is some of the problem with doing live demos. But anyway, it has logged me back. Okay, so it shows all the services. So you are having your login, your object services. So it one says, okay, this is having a request with the user ID password as the two parameters. So you know what inputs it is expecting. If I'm having some other service for getting address for geolocation, you can look at that and see what input parameters it is having, what output parameters. So this is the request. It needs a latitude, longitude, and API key for some maps. And in the response, it is going to return results. So you can see what all is there. And if you want to create a new service, you can also click on use existing and configure or attach a service that is already there. It shows the high level types of service that you can connect. If you're configuring something brand new, you can do that too by clicking on configure new. So this, I hope, is giving you the high level fundamentals of what all is there in Iris, right? So you can have storage services where you can just import an Excel file and this creates an app for you, connect to relational databases. Workflow is something I'll touch upon later, rules. You can have your OAuth authentication or social authentications, your data integration pieces. There are a lot more connectors. We try to surface only the most used ones at the top, and if you want more, you can see a longer list, and there is an even longer list in Foundry because you can import adapters from marketplace as well and use that, right? So this is to give an idea of the data, services, property panel, canvas, and stuff, right? So now going back, what else is there? So if you're trying to learn the platform, one of the first things that you can do is go to Hikes. So Hikes is basically an inbuilt tutorial that is baked into the platform itself. So you click on Hikes, it launches it. It is basically having a step-by-step guide of how you're going to build. So if you're trying to build a mobile app, it has a series of steps. It also gives an approximate how many steps are there, how much time it might take. Similarly for web app, developing front end, managing back end, and more advanced concepts. So think of this as inbuilt tutorials built into the IDE. This is not something that many platforms have. So this is kind of unique for Iris, but it is very helpful for you to learn. So basically it says, right, okay, if I'm trying to get started, first go and install the Voltamex preview app. So the preview app, again, if you're building web application, you can preview just in your browser. You do not need a preview app. But if you're trying to build an app for a mobile or a tablet, it helps tremendously to be able to preview it without, for example, for iOS to build the final binary, you need Xcode and all that Apple developer key certs and all that stuff. And similarly for Android, you will need your Android SDK and the exact version of Android SDK you're building the binary for. So that takes longer time. One is having all the requirements and building the full binary. So say, for example, that full binary takes like 5 minutes to build. This one would probably be done in a few seconds, right? And it will let you preview this exactly how it would look like in an application. And the preview apps are already in both the Google and Apple App Store, so you can just click on that. So you will have the Voltamex for tablet and Voltamex for mobile, and similarly iOS also. If you go, there will be an iOS Voltamex for iPhone and an Voltamex for iPad, right? So these are apps that will get you started. Now I'm not going to go and try to build a full binary and show it for preview. I am going to try to show you how the preview looks. Apologies for the pixelated look. It looks like I have a paid version of the mirroring, so it does an okay-ish job to show. So when you build an app in preview from within MX, right? So again, this one, just for information, it will let you talk to you like, hey, Forge, browse it, go to marketplace. So I can go to marketplace and I can search for this. Actually, in the interest of time, let me skip this and go directly, go to an external browser and open it. So this is the marketplace where it has all the samples. So if I'm talking about an employee directory sample, which is talking about, I can directly go here. I can register for this for free and download this, and then I can use this project in my application. And post that, it will specifically give you like instructions like open this, click this, and if there is something it has to, it will even give you a marker saying, hey, click this and all that stuff. It will help you do step by step to progress, right? Now, again, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this. And that was just to show you how this can be done, right? And you can build an app for preview or build the final thing, right? So you can choose what all platforms you're building for preview. And once you have built that, you can directly hook in your USB, or if you're in the same Wi-Fi, you can connect your Wi-Fi and look at the app. So this is, okay. Sorry, I think I might have to skip this in the interest of time. So you can preview something that you have side-loaded from USB or Wi-Fi, or if you've published, I can see this. So this is an app that is already there in Marketplace. So you can also preview all the apps that are there in Marketplace as well. So this is showing news and weather, and as you see, have full functionality. It is hitting the service, getting me the top stories, getting me the weather data. I can. So this is basically a story that somebody was talking about earlier in the call, and so you can actually see this. So this is live, and this is running within the shell of the app preview, but letting you see the full functionality without, building the binary. Now, with that said, I am going to move on with our presentation. So that was about Iris, right? We introduced a lot of concepts there. Test automation is another capability of Iris, where you can basically create test suite and test plans, and basically you just hook your device, manually test it once, it generates the code for you, and then it lets you run them, right? So basically, I'll just show a demo while I'm talking through this. So this is the same app that I had. So here I am going to the test resources panel on the left. I'm saying record, and then on the right, I am showing my emulator or device and recording. And as you can see, the code is getting generated as and when somebody is testing it. I can go and manually tweak the generated code if I want to. It is up to me if I want to, if I'm fine with the generated code as is without any tweaks, I can let it be. I can add all my data and stuff, and it created this whole test case, right? So once it has gone through this process, as I said, I can add some wait conditions, I can do some modifications, I can take screenshots and stop my recording, and then I can go and give this a name and then just run this, right? So I'm just creating another test case. I'm combining multiple of those test cases into a test suite, and then I'm just running the test suite from here. It runs it. As you can see, when I just click it, it runs the test cases and gives me the results, right? It says what passed, what failed, and all that stuff. And I can combine multiple of these test cases and run it as a test suite. So if something fails, it will also show where it failed and stuff like that. So, and how much time it took to run. And so it basically gives you a dashboard of the results of your test suite. This is something you can combine with the CI/CD, or ensure that there is no regression happening in your code. So this is a nice, cool tool which will be very, very helpful in application development, maintenance, and speeding up the entire process. If there is an error, as you see, it will even show you the exact line of file that caused the error, so to speak. Right? So that is about test automation. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to run through some of this. So the app built with Iris also comes with code obfuscation, something called as a protected mode, which is just a checkbox for the app developer. But the protected mode effectively gives you jailbreak or root detection so that the app does not run on a compromised device. It makes it hardens it against hacking, makes it tamper resistant and stuff like that. Let's now move on to Foundry. Foundry we covered briefly even earlier when we spoke about identity, integration, business rules and stuff. Let's just go into some of the more involved aspects of it, right? I'm gonna jump at a very high level. We have spoken about identity, integration, orchestration. Object service gives you a data model. I think we have covered a bit of this in the previous sessions as well. So I'm not going to go too much into it. Let us just jump into a demo. It also has analytics and DevOps. We'll cover that briefly in the demo, right? So apologies, these things time out. So even if I log in at the beginning, it will prompt me to log in again. So this is our Foundry console, one that has come from Sophie. I'll also show a brief demo of Sophie in this session. So at a very high level, you have your different apps. let's go to API management. We spoke about identity. I think we have all seen the demo of our first touch. Basically, you're configuring your authentication endpoint, passing any keys, secrets, and stuff. And once that is configured, this is the same thing that is going to be used from the application. You can even test it right from here, and then it gives you what the application is going to get, which is in this case the profile, authentication token, right, and any other value that is required, right? Your provider token, claims token, and such. So this is identity primarily for authentication. There are several types of identity services. You have, as we said, all the social identity pieces, your LDAP, Salesforce, SAML, any OAuth or Okta based, or even custom. So basically there is a custom option so that if there is something that is not out of the box that is readily there for your particular use case, you can build your own identity service as well. Integration service is basically connecting to data and pulling that data. So let me show a simple scenario that we had in that app as well, which is basically say news, right? So there is a new service that I've already configured with certain input parameters like country, category, API response, and some response in terms of articles, URL, title, description, and stuff. And once that is configured, I can directly again test it from within my Foundry, and it gives me back the response. As you can see here, this is the request payload I sent. This is the backend response. This is the structured response. If I want to see, I can click on something to just add this to my response parameter. So I don't have to actually go and put the XPath notation or anything for this. I can just say click and create response. It will add it there. I can see the unstructured full raw response as well if you want, and this is more like it recognizes that it is a JSON or an XML, and it is giving me the structure so that I can select any node and generate the JSON path. And I have, as I shown here, selected few of the results, and that result is showing up here, right? So I can tweak with them, I can rerun, test it, and see all the data. I also have log, which has the entire request response payload with the headers, everything, so that, you know, if I want to troubleshoot and stuff, I don't have to go anywhere else. Everything is here for me, and it also shows me in milliseconds how much time it took to parse this, how much time the backend request took, or how much time, you know, all the nitty-gritty details is available for you right from the Foundry console itself. Now let's move on to orchestration. So we spoke about integration where I'm connecting to one backend at a time. A typical situation, I'm connecting to say a login. I might want to do login, and then if I'm trying to show some account details, I might have to connect to 2 or 3 backends, a database, maybe Salesforce, maybe something else, collect all of that and collate and give one information so to the end user that is using the application. I don't want them to go and, you know, make 5 different calls from the app. As far as the app is concerned, I'm making one call. The server takes care of connecting to the 4 or 5 different backends or whatever it is, collate it and send back. So that is where orchestration comes in. So we have this particular orchestration where it is trying to get weather and location and top stories. The weather and location is itself another 2 service combination of location service and weather forecast. So basically I can invoke these, you know, sequentially if there is dependency that weather has to be, location has to be first obtained. For me to pass that location to the weather, then they have to run in sequence. So I can create it that way too. Or once I have done that, I can have them run concurrently too. So now I have the location, I can get the stories and weather with just that, and I can run them concurrently. So I can choose sequential, concurrent. I also can run them in a loop. So let me just show, for example, this is a combination of 3 integration services, as I said, because this is itself a combination of 2. I can, as I showed earlier, I can just test them right from here. I have to just pass some parameters. I'm just passing some lat long, which would have come from the app as is, but I'm just trying to simulate what would come from the app. So I'm trying to test it. And here I got the weather forecast at the beginning, and I can just expand it for easier viewing, right? and then the stories for that particular location that I passed as well. So I've combined the response from multiple services and stuff into one single thing, and then I can, the news and weather app sample that I showed you earlier can pull the data from this. So this is an example of orchestration service. Object service, I think we have looked at, but I'll anyway very briefly touch upon this. So we had the recipe sample for the first touch app that we spoke about earlier. So you have your mapping fields and your verbs, like your CRUD verbs, get, put, post, delete, and stuff. And I can test these right from here. So I can see if there are any OData filters I have specified, any request mapping that is done, any response mapping that is done, and I can test it as well right from within the Foundry console itself. So because this was protected with an authentication, I'll just briefly touch upon that as well. It is showing the login screen so that I log in first before it can pull the appropriate data. In this case, it is only trying to pull the recipes data back from the Domino NSF. So this is the same data I would have seen earlier, which is basically the cooking directions for some recipe which is involving spaghetti, and a lot of these, all the records are out here, right, with the images and stuff. So one thing I wanted to also talk about briefly here is the concept of security level. You can have an API as public, which you can do for testing, but you never go to an actual production app with public, because public means anybody who has that URL can send the required input parameters and get a response. Anonymous is basically where you choose to create an app key, app secret, and that app key, app secret is passed along with the URL. So it knows that it is coming from such and such app, but it doesn't know who within that app is using it. So that is another level of security. Then you have authenticated app users, which is what I demonstrated. Even it needs to know exactly who is authenticating and using that app so that it can show the appropriate data. And then there is something which cannot even be authenticated from the client side, but it is purely for a server to server, which is called as private internal server only. If you are invoking something which service A needs to invoke service B, and both are at the server, service B is never accessed from the client, I can even create private. So that is another type of service. And there is a lot more. So I'll, in the interest of time, again, skip through some of this. You have an ability to create a developer portal, an API management portal, so that if you are just exposing that for your partner or somebody to hit and use Foundry directly as an API instead of from the client, you can do that. It also has a lot of reporting capabilities. I'll just try to briefly switch to another environment which actually has more reporting data than my demo environment to show that. So there are again, depending on whether it is this is can be an add-on. The reporting pieces, capturing the data is built in, but it has the ability to collect the entire application user journey, see what the app user did. For example, if there is a crash, it can tell what are the last 5 steps the app developer did, not the app developer, the end user did before the application crashed, how many people are actively using it, how many errors are happening, how often is the app used, how many new users are logging in, what is my performance, how many for the service, for how long it took at my peak time to get the service data back from the backend, where are the people that are accessing my app, how many sessions are there happening per device. There are a lot of reports built in, and you have dashboards for kind of some of the same data. You also have ability to create your own funnel reports, custom reports. This can be a separate session on its own, but just letting you know that the capability of collecting metrics and building this thing is very, very powerful within Foundry as a whole, right? And with that, I'll go back to my PowerPoint. I'm going to skip through this. This is basically talking about using single sign-on across different applications. If you want to use the same application authentication, but not log into the second app because the first app has logged in, there is something called a single sign-on that is available. So again, I'm going to skip through this in the interest of time. And Workflow is basically a very long running service. So if I'm trying to create a loan process or a procurement, some other approval where it has different parties involved, one party creates the request, some other party evaluates it. You are also in between invoking some services to validate and then finally say yes or no or whatever, right? So basically long running processes as workflow is something that can also be run via Foundry, and it has events means of invocation, API means of invocation. Again, lot of stuff which we do not have too much time in this call. At a very brief, I'm showing an example of a loan workflow. Somebody created an application and we make a service invocation to a third party like Equifax to get the credit score, and then we verify. If the verification went through automatically, you run a rule type. Rule is like a simple English type creating business logic, and it can automatically approve it or reject it, right? And this uses all the services and capability that we already saw, which is like the integration service, your orchestration service, your authentication or identity service, and such. So we will skip through this. There are reference material at the end of this call, which will let you go through detailed webinars or training content. So you can learn a lot more about all these concepts. Because this is an intro call and limited to 1 hour, I have to run through. Apologies for that. Right. Then another piece that I did not have time to show you is this concept called as engagement server. Engagement server is also a part of Foundry. This is basically for engaging with your customers in terms of campaigns. It can be sending SMS, it can be sending emails, it can be sending push notification, rich push notification. It also has the ability to do geolocation based triggers. So basically, say I am having an app built for a specific retail outlet and I'm within half a mile of a retail outlet, it can detect that. If you've created a campaign saying that if the person is within half a mile, send them a promo code, right? Saying, hey, there is a 10% discount for such and such, do you want to go and buy, right? So you can do those kinds of promotions and stuff as well using VoltaMX engagement. So this is another service, right? Other capability of Foundry. Now, the recap so I'm going to leave this here in the slide for the recording and stuff. It is going to be too time consuming to go through all these different concepts that we spoke about and the equivalent in Domino, right? So like the integration service or rule service, some of them do not have an equivalent. Some like the processes and identity, we did speak about an equivalent. So there is a marketplace also that I showed you briefly, which is kind of like the open NTF that you have, engagement service, and some other things do not have an equivalent. So this is from the Foundry perspective. An IDE, again, Iris, there are a lot of elements. Excuse me. It also has a internationalization, native debuggers, preview, test automation, native function interface, AI assistant, CI/CD platform, and such. Now, let me just very briefly give you a demo of VoltaMX Go in Sophie. So Sophie is basically our solutions factory of HCL, where you have the ability to search and deploy solutions for different products or platforms that HCL has. We are very pleased to announce you that VoltaMX Go is now part of Sophie. So you can just search for hclsophie.com, and in this case, we are going to search for VoltaMX Go. It will show you VoltaMX Go. I already have a sandbox running. If you do not have a sandbox, you can just click launch and it will create a new sandbox for you. It will create the Foundry environment, the Domino REST API needed to connect to the backend, as well as let you download Iris IDE. It will also give you the admin ID so that you can actually hook in your Domino designer directly to that and look at the NSF data or upload new databases that you want, new NSFs that you want to replicate or use as part of your evaluation of the product. So you can do all of this. It has the brief about and stuff, but more importantly, we have a full step-by-step guide of how you go and use VoltaMX Go on Sophie, including a video walkthrough, which will walk you through the full step-by-step of how do you create it, and how do you first of all create an instance and then sign up and then click this and connect to your Domino instance, create the first touch. How do you run your identity and say connect it? How does Iris connect to that first touch app? It's very well explained in this. I would highly recommend that you go and try this out. It is free. Anybody can sign up and evaluate it. If a customer or partner, you might already have access. If not, you can just register for it and request. That sandboxes by default are extendable up to 30 days with no without having to talk to a person. We will still take your registration information so that we are aware that you're interested in this. And so this is a very easy way for somebody to get started and evaluate the product with without having to host or install or do anything, right? Iris is an IDE, so you still have to download it to your system, but everything else we provision for you so that you can just hook it up and get started. So that was about Sophie. And okay, so I think we are at the end of the session. We wanted to leave some time for Q&A and stuff. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is part of the webinar series. Our next webinar is on 20th September, where our TA team is going to talk you through how they have taken some apps from Domino and how they have been able to build beautiful apps with VoltaMX Go and Domino using that. They're going to take you through some use cases and walk you through the process of how they were able to achieve that. That will be a very interesting webinar. I recommend that you join that. As I mentioned earlier, it is VoltaMX Go is live on Sophie. You can scan this QR code, or as I said, it is a very simple URL, hclsophie.com, and you can go and search for VoltaMX Go and do that. And there is a ton of content in terms of YouTube videos and tutorials and stuff for this. You can go and look at the new user orientation. Again, you can just Google new user orientation for VoltaMX. You will get this as well. This is the QR code for that. That also walks through the process of creating your first app, going through the hike and connecting to marketplace and previewing it in app preview and all that stuff. We did a big webinar, actually a couple of webinars for the 9.5 launch last year, December. So that is also available as part of this. Even the 9.2 and other previous videos will be there in the YouTube. If you want to, you can get into this. There is a lot of training content in HCL Software U, which is basically our training portal for VoltaMX. There it is segregated by different user personas like designer, front-end developer, back-end developer, low-code developer, professional developer. So they have tried to create different personas so that the target is, content is targeted for based on the user persona, and it has training content with materials like, hey, if you're doing a lesson, this is the lesson, this is the samples for the lesson that you can use and such. So with that, I'll open it up to Q&A.
Great, and thank you, Suhas. Everyone, if you have questions, we have some already, but you can go post them in the question panel over in the control panel for the webinar. And the first question we have is, what is the equivalent of Domino View in VoltaMX?
Michael, do you want to take that?
I'll be happy to. I was getting over here to do the camera. The question is a great question. It came in first on our invite, and the sort of short answer is we have this thing called segments in VoltaMX, and a segment in VoltaMX gives you the opportunity to construct these lists that are similar to what views operate as. As many of you are aware, views have a lot of function. Views carry actions in the same way that forms carry actions and so on. So there are bits that you will have to sort of stretch your mind to think about it being a single thing within Iris, because the segment doesn't contain actions itself, but you can create a component that contains segments and actions. You can create really arbitrarily complex components. So the short answer is a segment is the direct mapping from a glossary level, but from a bigger picture, from a overall, there are elements that the domino model just does a ton with a view. And that sort of expansive capability requires a little bit more assembly within MX, not a one-to-one mapping.
Great, thank you, Michael. Our next question, Iris runs in my workstation. Where should Foundry run? Does it run on a network server or hosted? What are some of the pros and cons of different approaches there?
Yep. So Foundry runs, so there are multiple options of where you want to run Foundry. Typically, it is a server, so it is running on a different system, not on your local application developer's laptop. It is a server, it is an application server. It is meant to be always running so that your apps can connect to it. You can run it on-premise on your instance. You will have the ability to shortly have us host it for you. There is going to be a VoltaMX SaaS model, so you can have us host it for you. Anything else you would like to add here, Michael?
Yeah, the one thing that I would throw in addition to that is to think about the kinds of clients and the types of integrations that are going to take place. This is not really different from what you would do in making the determination of where to host a Domino server, but it comes with some slightly different, fairly obvious kinds of considerations. For example, well-known services being able to get back to it, the idea of mobile devices connecting through VPNs and arbitrary external services that might need to connect through VPNs. Hosting in a cloud, as Suhas said, is perfectly reasonable. Hosting it with our service is perfectly reasonable. And of course, very many of the services you could host behind a firewall.
Great. Our next question has to do with credentials. In VoltMX Go, do you pass user credentials to the Domino API, or do you use a static notes ID?
So I'll go ahead and talk for that one first. And Suhas, you can add additional functional capabilities from an MX platform perspective. But for what we demonstrate with the Go packages out of the box, we tend to lean towards we're going to pass the credentials on through. We've done a lot of work with the Domino team. There are continuing features that are coming out in the next main release of Domino that are going to make this even easier, even better technically. But what you see right now and what you do completely honors the end user that you're talking about. The OAuth box that you see regularly, that's the Domino credential that's being authenticated within Domino to say that you are okay to use that resource with those permissions. And as Suhas pointed out, there are a number of other machine-to-machine cases. There are a number of other orchestration cases that can be achieved. All of that is sort of available, I'll say, to the Go case and to reaching back to a Domino resource.
Very good. Thank you. I know, going back to the very beginning, offline access has been a very important part of Domino deployments. Suhas, do you want to talk a little bit about what's available from an offline standpoint, from an MX application standpoint?
Yeah, sure. So from an MX standpoint, we spoke briefly about object services and the like, right? So where we are creating a data model for how the data is in your backend is going to be represented in the client application. So there is something called as offline objects, which is a capability of VoltMX, where when that is set to true and you can set it at a service level, it tries to create a database and replicate that data that the client app can see on the local device, and it can synchronize it. And That way it can maintain a local copy of the model that it sees. The app developer, the end user, actually can use the app as though the app is connecting to the backend. They can be, in a place where there is no network or there is bad network, continue using the app as usual. Everything gets synchronized to their local database. When they're in a place where it has network, it can synchronize and send the data back to the backend and ensure they are both in sync. Now, there are bound to be scenarios where you can have conflicts, like the app developer, the end user and somebody else also modified the same record. So you have different mechanism of resolving the conflicts. So you can set simple policies like server always wins or client always wins, or you can even write custom logic saying, hey, look at this field, look at that field, and based on that, resolve this thing, who wins, client or server. So you have multiple options of creating and resolving conflicts and ensuring that your app works robustly with or without a network.
And I'll add to that, if you wind up when you're using Domino as a backend and you create conflict records, it will create the conflict record in notes exactly like you would expect it to.
Great. We have our next question is about permissions. How does MXGo apply permissions like write versus read only for different Domino users with different permissions?
So it will use the same kind of access that you have within any other note application environment. So Go respects the Domino security model, sort of top to bottom. And what that means is if you've got a reader's field or something, an author's field, and you want to have somebody, some population, I'll call it, be able to read documents, but some other population be able to edit those documents or create documents, you have that straight control because it's gated by the Domino REST APIs, and the Domino REST APIs make sure that we enforce and follow the Domino rules.
Excellent. And we've got time for one more here. We have a question about the state of attachment handling from Domino databases through the Domino adapter.
Well, I can make that one a fairly quick one. It is evolving, continues to move forward. We do have some changes that we're going to introduce in the next update, but it's safe to go ahead and start playing with and looking at. One of the things you saw in our object services and the request to get to the recipe database for First Touch was we're actually taking and just encoding those images in line right now. And there are a number of considerations and conversations around how to make sure that we can get a full support. It is not expected that we're going to say every use case is fully covered in the London release, the 2.0 release, but it will evolve.
Okay, very good. And
All right.
Suhas, back to you to close it out.
Yep, thank you. So thank you all for coming. I hope that this session provided you a lot of information and you're leaving with a much better understanding of what is possible with Voltemex. Again, there is a ton of content. If you want me to talk for a full week, I can do that. This is a 1 hour session, so we had to fit in a lot into this. I hope it was still easy to consume. As I said, we have a lot of reference material, training content. Please use that. If you would like to learn more about Voltemex Go in general, or get connected to a HCL sales representative or business partner, please use the QR code that you see here and we'll get in touch. Thank you once again for your time. Thank you.